I was not expecting to like Solo Leveling, and I still don't think I do exactly, but my expectations for what I thought would be an uninteresting, overhyped, and substanceless power fantasy were pleasantly subverted. Solo Leveling is undoubtedly a cliché power fantasy, clearly aimed at young men and teenage boys, but it does just enough right, puts just enough effort into places other contemporary stories would falter, that it's able to be engaging while adhering to many tropes that would otherwise be tiring. The first in of itself being our protagonist, Jinwoo. Jinwoo at the start of a story is an E-rank hunter, the weakest classification of hunters, and because of this, he does get mistreated by other hunters, but it's not to a comically evil degree. A lesser story would write this mistreatment in a way where the world is unnecessarily cruel to him, usually in an attempt for the narrative to justify some awful revenge fantasy nonsense later. But in Solo Leveling, it's not like that. Hunters have existed for just 10 years, so most people aren't hunters. It wouldn't make sense for people to be extremely cruel outside of certain scenarios with certain characters. And secondly, at most, it's playful teasing by people who are essentially just random strangers he has to work with to clear a dungeon. What I like about this approach to Jinwoo's mistreatment is that it makes the story feel far more grounded and realistic, because by and large, the people in Solo Leveling act like real people. In fact, I really appreciate this grounded approach to both character writing and world building in a story that could easily suffer from the typical anime-isms of power fantasy. It's the little details that get me, like how hunting is a gig economy job, how contracts have to be signed and reports have to be made before and after a dungeon, how people just stand around and take pictures on their phone when a gate appears, how hunters get invited with phone notifications. It all just comes together and creates a story where from watching you pose questions, and then those questions actually get answered because the author already thought of that. Like when you learn that parties need a minimum number of people to legally raid a dungeon and you think, wouldn't someone just exploit that by gathering low-ranked hunters to fill the quota and killing them in order to keep their share of the loot? And then in the next 2 episodes, yeah, that actually happens. Characters in Solo Leveling actually feel like well-rounded people. You get the sense that there's more to them than you initially know, even when you haven't gotten to know about their backstory. And a lot of this is actually done through dialogue, something I don't typically see anime do correctly. Now, I haven't read the Solo Leveling manhwa, but I do feel like a lot of the quirks I appreciate from Solo Leveling come from the fact that it's a Korean story first and not Japanese. Like, there's a scene where Jinwoo comes back home after a while looking absolutely shredded, and his sister notices. And when this scene came up, I honestly panicked a little because of anime's tendency to get a bit deviant with its sibling relationships. But it wasn't treated in a weird way, and Jinwoo and his sister actually act like real siblings. Jinwoo isn't some antisocial loser either. Even though he's mocked by other hunters sometimes, he's still by and large a good person, and he's got empathetic and relatable goals. This is wanting to provide for his sister and his dying mother. Jinwoo's character works so well because he's dealing with adult stuff like rent, job security, and providing for his family. Right before Jinwoo's second awakening, as he's about to be killed, I like that he genuinely regrets his heroic action that's going to lead to him dying. It's stuff like this, in culmination, that makes Solo Leveling just feel better than most power fantasy anime. Now, here's where my problem with the show begins. Jinwoo is initially a very interesting character. Ultimately, his goal of providing for his family to save his dying mother is very compelling. But you see, the trick with writing characters like this is to never make it seem like the goal is so easily obtainable that the journey no longer feels like a struggle. Edward and Alphonse can't find a working Philosopher's Stone in the first 3 episodes. Deku can't master one for all by the first season. By episode 6, Jinwoo is taking down bosses that are at least C rank, and it's all a bit too much too soon. This is where the power fantasy aspects start to bore me. It now solely becomes about getting stronger, solely about getting a literal video game meter up. And I don't even like RPGs. The first few times, it's exciting, it's exhilarating to see Jinwoo overcome some crazy monster. But like, after the second time, the novelty has worn off. I understand that the appeal of the Solo Leveling manhwa was the gorgeous art, and I think the anime does translate that into animation well enough. However, with manhwa, manga, and comics, it's all based on how fast you read. You're in control a lot more of the pacing, and it's mostly just images. So if you're getting bored by a particular fight, then you can just skim through it. With anime, you have to sit down through the full fight. And sure, well-animated Sakuga-rich fights are great, but I've never really considered them to be the essence of what makes a good fight scene. Like, JJK Season 2 has a lot of well-animated fights, but at the same time, some of them just don't feel engaging because you don't care about the characters. Or rather, I don't care about the characters. So how much more boring do you think it would be to watch Jinwoo fight random monsters or characters we know nothing about? And I think there's a simple solution to this problem. The rest of the Solo Leveling cast shocked me with just how intriguing they all are. And I think the biggest thing holding down these first 13 episodes so far is how the story is just a bit too attached to Jinwoo. Like this purple-haired guy that's introduced, does nothing for like 5 episodes, and then we discover he's insane and loves killing people, before he's immediately killed off after. Wouldn't this reveal be a lot more effective if we learnt about his abilities and him being insane before he meets Jinwoo? The limit of power fantasy is that all conflict is resolved by a singular solution: get stronger. Which is why power fantasy is so popular with younger audiences, especially young men. I mean this in the best way possible. It's a juvenile and simplistic type of story where the author suggests that all you need to do to overcome the obstacles ahead of you is to keep practicing and just keep moving forward. But as you grow older, as you have more life experience, you learn that some obstacles in your life aren't so easy to defeat. Sometimes you need to look at a different angle, sometimes you need the help of other people, and sometimes you have to accept that there are certain problems you just can't fix, and you have to learn to live with them. I think it's easy to look down on power fantasy anime as poorly written, trope-filled, and unoriginal. But nothing, that's it. These stories do have their place, it's just that they're made for a certain demographic of people, and I don't fall under that demographic anymore. I'm sure there's some kid out there watching Solo Leveling having the time of his life, and I hope he enjoys it. As for Solo Leveling, I think I've had my fill. I might check out the second season because I feel like it was definitely obvious it was supposed to be one season split into 2 cores, but other than that, I've seen enough. I'm satisfied. Thanks for watching, make sure to like, subscribe, and all that jazz, and I'll see you in the next video.